The grand banquet hall of Viridian, a shining jewel in the galaxy, hummed with energy. Silver chandeliers gleamed above the guests, casting light on the vast room filled with the galaxy's most powerful individuals. They were all gathered to meet the princess, the young and striking Lyra, the sole heir to the throne of Viridian. The walls of the hall were adorned with tapestries that told the stories of her ancestors, great leaders who had united the Viridian people, leading them through wars and alliances that spanned centuries. But for all the pride of her lineage, Princess Lyra felt only the weight of her crown, a burden she had carried since her father's passing. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. She was to choose a suitor, a decision that would secure her future and strengthen the empire. Yet, as she stood at the center of the hall, greeting each guest with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes, she wondered if this was a decision she could ever make freely. Lyra's thoughts drifted to the many suitors who had already presented themselves in the past few days. Some were princes from distant planets, their wealth and armies impressive. Some were rich traders who had built empires from nothing, their eyes sharp with ambition. And then there were the warlords, whose muscles and battles earned them respect, but left her cold. They all wanted something from her, not just her heart, but her title. She glanced across the room and saw them again, standing at the edges of the crowd, men who had traveled great distances, all vying for her attention. She had met them all over the past weeks, each one more eager than the last to prove that they were the right choice to stand by her side. But none of them had captured her heart. None had even made her feel anything more than duty. The advisors, her family, and the elite of Viridian all whispered amongst themselves, watching her closely. She knew what they wanted, a union that would secure the throne, a suitor who would help her rule, make alliances, and strengthen the empire. But Lyra was not like them. She had never been interested in power for power's sake. She didn't want to be a ruler who controlled others from behind a gilded cage. She longed for something real, something true. Yet it seemed that every suitor who arrived before her saw only her crown, her inheritance, her potential to bring them glory. As she moved through the hall, accepting compliments and nodding politely to the men who greeted her, Lyra felt her spirit grow heavy. The warm glow of the chandeliers, the music that played softly in the background, and the laughter of the guests, all seemed distant. She was alone in this crowd, surrounded by people, yet trapped in a world that didn't seem to understand her. She stopped at a large window that overlooked the city. The Viridian skyline stretched out before her, a dazzling display of lights and towers that reached toward the stars. It was beautiful, she had to admit, but it was also suffocating. There was no room to breathe in this place, no space for her to simply be. From the corner of her eye, Lyra saw the next suitor approaching. He was tall, dark-haired, and handsome, dressed in the finest fabrics that the Empire had to offer. His smile was confident, even charming, and as he stepped toward her, she could hear the soft murmur of the crowd noticing him. He was Prince Valen, a ruler from a neighboring planet, whose fleet had fought beside Viridians in recent years. A skilled negotiator, he had earned his place among the galaxy's elite. But like all the others, Lyra could tell that Valen's interest was not in her, but in what she could offer. "Your Highness," he said, bowing low before her. "It is an honor to be in your presence." "I trust you find the evening to your liking?" Lyra forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It is beautiful, Prince Valen. Thank you for your kindness." He looked at her, his gaze lingering a little longer than was polite, as though trying to read her. Lyra could feel the weight of his gaze and, for a moment, felt a strange pang of frustration. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the throne she would one day inherit. "Your beauty outshines the stars, Princess," he said smoothly. "I hope you will grant me the honor of a dance. A future together would be as glorious as this night." Lyra nodded politely, the words empty in her mind. She didn't want him. She didn't want any of them. But she was trapped, wasn't she? The weight of expectations from her family, from her people, was pressing down on her like an unrelenting storm. "Perhaps later," she replied, her voice a little colder than she intended. Prince Valen, undeterred, bowed once more. "Of course, Your Highness." He turned and melted back into the crowd, his attention already moving on to his next conquest. Lyra sighed and looked out the window again, her fingers gently tapping against the cool glass. She had no desire to marry any of these men. They all seemed like strangers, characters in a play she didn't want to be a part of. She longed for something more, something real. But that seemed like a foolish dream in a galaxy that cared more for power than for love. As the night wore on, the princess was introduced to more men. Each one was more polished than the last, their words sweeter, their gifts grander. And each time, Lyra felt herself grow colder, more distant. Then, something unexpected happened. As the evening neared its peak, and Lyra found herself again on the balcony, trying to escape the noise below, her eyes fell upon someone completely out of place in this royal setting. There was a man standing on the far side of the balcony, leaning casually against the railing. He was not in a suit or a robe of fine fabric, but rather simple clothes, earth-toned trousers and a shirt that looked worn, as though he had traveled far. His hair was a mess, his face unshaven, and his eyes, while curious, held no trace of the ambition that defined the others. It was Adam. He was not part of the noble circle, and perhaps that was why he intrigued Lyra. He was a guest of one of the lesser officials, someone she had barely noticed when he arrived earlier in the evening. He didn't belong here, yet there he was, standing quietly on the balcony, watching the stars with an expression of peace that no one else seemed to have. Lyra couldn't help but watch him for a moment. His presence was a stark contrast to the others. While the nobles and politicians were swarming around her, trying to win her favor with extravagant speeches and grand gestures, Adam seemed content to simply be. He didn't try to impress anyone. He didn't need to. Then, almost without thinking, Lyra stepped toward him. She wasn't sure what compelled her. Maybe it was the quietness of the moment, or the fact that Adam seemed like a person who didn't care for the political games that filled her life. As she drew closer, she overheard him speak softly to himself. "Why would anyone want that kind of life?" he muttered, his tone filled with a quiet disbelief. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She froze. He hadn't meant to speak loud enough for anyone to hear, but she had, and the words pierced through the noise of the banquet like nothing else had that evening. The words were simple, but they resonated in a way nothing else had. Why would anyone want that kind of life? Lyra's mind raced.
Why, indeed? Without thinking, she moved closer to him.
Adam didn't notice her at first, his gaze still fixed on the stars. It was only when she was standing just a few feet away that he looked up, startled. "You," Lyra said, her voice soft but steady. "You speak the truth." Adam blinked in confusion, unsure of how to respond. I didn't mean to offend." "No offense," Lyra replied quickly, her heart pounding. "It's just you're the first person tonight who's not pretending to be something they're not." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with the weight of her words. Finally, Adam spoke, his voice slow and thoughtful. "I don't mean to sound rude, Princess, but I've seen a lot of people here tonight, and you don't seem like any of them."
"You deserve better than this. All of this."
He waved a hand to encompass the hall. No one should have to live for everyone else's expectations. Lyra stood there, speechless. It was the first time in ages that someone had spoken to her like a real person, not a symbol or a piece in a grand political game. She didn't know why, but something inside her stirred. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to hold back the emotions she had kept buried for so long. Adam, unsure of what else to say, simply nodded. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Princess." Lyra stood still, her gaze fixed on Adam, the human who had dared to speak so frankly in a room full of polished faces and rehearsed lines. For a moment, she almost wished she could step away from the weight of the room, the gilded hall, and the thousands of eyes watching her every move. But Adam didn't care about any of that. He hadn't even acknowledged the grandeur of the palace or the riches around him. He had simply spoken the truth, a truth that Lyra had longed to hear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft yet filled with something deeper, a mix of gratitude and relief. She didn't know why, but in that moment, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. Adam stood awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. The silence between them was thick, yet it was unlike the usual suffocating silence of the court. It felt different, unfiltered, genuine. His eyes met hers for the first time properly, and there was no admiration in them, no attempt to flatter her. There was just a quiet acknowledgement of who she was, not who they expected her to be. "You're welcome," Adam said, his tone still cautious. "I didn't mean to offend you. I just spoke my mind." "No offense," Lyra assured him quickly, shaking her head. It's rare to hear someone say something so honest. Everyone else seems to speak only in what's expected of them. You're the first person here tonight who hasn't." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra didn't feel like she was performing. She wasn't a princess here. She was just a woman, standing with someone who seemed to understand that. Adam glanced at the grand hall behind her, the laughter, the music, the conversation. Everything that had seemed so distant moments ago, and then back at her. "I don't belong here," he said, his words simple, but with a quiet strength. "This place, it's like a stage, and everyone here is acting." "You're part of that act, whether you want to be or not." Lyra felt a sharp pang in her chest, as though Adam had just peeled away a layer of something she had buried deep inside. He was right. Everything about her life, about the expectations placed on her, was a performance. The endless courtships, the alliances, the image of the perfect princess who would one day lead. None of it had ever been real.
"I don't belong here either," she confessed quietly, though her voice almost cracked with the honesty of her admission.
"I never have." Adam's eyes softened slightly. He didn't speak again, but there was something in his gaze, a silent understanding, that made Lyra feel less alone.
"You don't want any of them, do you?" Adam asked after a moment, his voice low and direct. "Those men who want your crown, your empire, your power?" Lyra blinked, caught off guard by his question. She hadn't realized it, but in the silence between them, she had been searching for the right words to explain what she had been feeling for so long. She nodded slowly. "No, I don't want any of them." "Then why do you stay here, with all of them?" Adam's question was simple, yet it struck Lyra like a wave crashing into the shore. The weight of it was too much to ignore. She had never allowed herself to ask that question, never had the space to think it through. She had been taught from a young age that her duty was to her people, to her legacy. He was the princess, and the empire's future depended on her choices. But what did she really want? "Because I have to," she finally whispered. "I have no choice. My people need me." "They need a ruler, a strong one!" Adam's lips pressed together in a tight line, and he studied her for a long moment. "But that's just it, isn't it?"
"You're living their life, not your own." Lyra looked away. She had never admitted it aloud before, but his words were the truth.
She had been living for everyone but herself. Her heart had never been in it, not the way it should be. She wasn't ready to be the ruler they expected her to be. She wasn't sure she could ever be that person. "Why are you here then?" Lyra asked quietly, her voice laced with curiosity. "What do you want from this?" "From me?" Adam took a deep breath, the tension in his posture easing just a little. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the balcony, his gaze drifting over the stars above, the city below. "I don't know what I'm supposed to want," he said finally. "But I know what I don't want. I don't want to live a life that isn't mine. I don't want to be caught up in all this pretending."
Lyra stood still, taking in his words, unsure of how to respond. What could she say?
She had never met anyone like him. Someone who spoke so plainly, who didn't care for the masks that everyone else wore. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though she were talking to someone who saw her, truly saw her. "You speak as if you have the choice to leave," she said, her voice a bit softer, "as if you don't have to follow orders." Adam smiled faintly, and for a moment there was a warmth in his expression that made Lyra's chest tighten. "I don't follow anyone's orders," he said with a quiet confidence. "I'm just trying to find my own way in the universe."
But it seems like you're not really looking for a way out. You're just waiting for someone to tell you what to do.
The word stung, and Lyra felt a sudden, intense urge to defend herself, to argue. But she didn't, because deep down, she knew he was right. She had always been waiting. Waiting for the moment when her father would return and take her out of the political chaos. Waiting for someone to come and make decisions for her. Waiting for the weight to lift off her shoulders, for the burden of responsibility to be taken from her. "I'm not waiting," she said quickly, though it felt more like a reflex than the truth.
I just don't know what else to do. I have to make a choice.
And I don't know if I can make the right one. "Why does it have to be the right one?" Adam asked, his voice almost amused. "Maybe it's just about making the choice that feels right for you." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. It was a simple statement, but in that moment, it was like a door had opened in her mind. What if there was no such thing as the right choice? What if she wasn't supposed to be looking for the perfect answer, but for something that made her feel alive, something that felt real? Before she could say anything more, there was a slight movement behind her. Lyra turned quickly, finding one of the palace guards standing in the doorway. "Your Highness," the guard said, bowing respectfully. "The council is waiting for you. The banquet is nearing its end." Lyra blinked, her mind snapping back to reality. The moment between her and Adam felt suspended in time, and for a second she almost wished she could stay there forever, away from the prying eyes of her court, away from the decisions she wasn't ready to make. Adam, sensing her discomfort, nodded toward the guard. "You should go," he said softly. "They're waiting for you. You've got a duty to your people." Lyra stared at him, the words echoing in her mind. A duty to her people. But what about her own duty? To herself? For the first time in years, Lyra felt torn. She was trapped between two worlds, the one she was expected to rule, and the one she could only dream of. Adam's words had shaken her, but they had also opened up something inside her. A small spark of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a life beyond the throne. "I'll go," she said quietly, straightening her shoulders. "But I won't forget what you said." Adam gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I'll be here if you ever want to talk." Lyra nodded, then turned to leave, the weight of her decision pressing heavier than ever on her shoulders. But as she walked back into the banquet hall, something had changed inside her. A small seed of doubt had been planted in her mind, one that would grow in the days to come. The days following the banquet passed slowly, each moment stretching out like an eternity. Lyra found herself lost in thought, her mind constantly drifting back to the brief conversation she'd had with Adam. His words echoed in her mind, replaying over and over, like a song she couldn't shake. She had always known there was something missing in her life, but it had never been so clear until now, the realization that she had been living for everyone else. Her family, her people, her ancestors, was both liberating and terrifying. Everywhere she went, the expectations followed her. The grand halls of the palace, the courtyards where she would usually find solace, all felt like they were closing in on her. The duties of the crown, the political games, the endless stream of suitors. It was all so overwhelming. It wasn't just the pressure to choose a suitor, though that was part of it. It was the pressure to become someone she wasn't sure she could be. Lyra had always known that her life was set out for her. She was the princess, the future ruler of Viridian. But now, the more she thought about it, the less she wanted to follow the path that had been laid out for her. She wanted to be free, to make her own choices, to live a life that wasn't dictated by her title, her legacy, or the expectations of her people. She didn't even know where to start. Her thoughts often turned to Adam, the human who had dared speak so plainly. He wasn't part of the royal court, didn't belong to the political world that ruled her life, yet in a way that made him the most interesting person she had met in years. He wasn't interested in her position or the power she wielded. He saw her for who she was, not who she was expected to be. And for that, she was grateful. But the more she thought about him, the more complicated it all became. She had been raised to see herself as a symbol of power, a beacon of hope for her people. She was the future, the one who would carry the weight of Viridian's future on her shoulders. Adam didn't care about that. He had no expectations. He simply lived his life without concern for titles or alliances, and in that simplicity, he had captured her attention. But what could a human and a princess possibly share? Was it foolish to even entertain the thought of something more than a passing conversation? The nights became harder to endure, as Lyra found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing. She had always been able to escape the pressure by focusing on her duties, her role as a future queen. But now her role felt suffocating. The longer she stayed within the confines of the palace walls, the more she felt trapped, as if the very air was pushing in on her. She began to avoid her family. She spent less time with her advisors, ducking out of meetings and events whenever possible. Instead, she found herself wandering the quieter parts of the palace, hoping for some sense of peace. The gardens, usually a place of refuge, now seemed empty. The flowers bloomed, but their colors no longer brought her comfort. The sky above was still beautiful, but it felt distant, as if she was watching someone else's life unfold. Lyra couldn't understand it. She had everything she was supposed to want: wealth, power, the loyalty of her people. And yet, she felt more alone than ever. It was late one evening when Lyra found herself once again standing on the balcony, gazing out at the stars. The cool breeze lifted her hair, and she closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had been avoiding Adam, not because she didn't want to see him, but because his presence had stirred something inside her that she wasn't sure how to handle. She didn't know what she wanted from him, or if she was even allowed to want anything. But she missed him. She missed the simplicity of his words, the way he didn't try to impress her, the way he made her feel like she could be herself, even for just a moment.
You seem distant, a voice interrupted her thoughts. Lyra turned to see her cousin, Celine, approaching her with a curious expression.
Celine had always been a sharp one, and it wasn't hard to see that something was weighing on Lyra's mind. "I'm fine," Lyra said quickly, though the lie felt hollow even as she said it. Celine raised an eyebrow. "You've been fine for the past week."
I think it's time you tell me what's really going on. Lyra sighed, leaning against the railing as she looked out at the stars. I don't know, Selena.
I just feel like everything is slipping away from me. I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore.
"You've always known," Celine said, her tone softening. "You're the princess." "You're the future of Viridian." Lyra shook her head. "That's just it, though. I don't know if I want to be the future of Viridian anymore. I'm trapped in this role, and I don't know if I can do it." Celine studied her for a moment, and Lyra could see the gears turning in her cousin's mind. "So, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," Lyra replied honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about it for days, and I still don't have an answer." Celine smiled softly, the kind of smile that spoke volumes without saying a word.
Maybe it's time you stopped thinking about what everyone else wants and started thinking about what you want.
Lyra turned to her cousin, surprised by the bluntness of her words. What do you mean? You've been trying to live up to other people's expectations for so long, Celine said, her voice gentle yet firm.
Maybe it's time you stopped doing that. If you don't want to be the queen, then don't be the queen. If you want to run away, then run away. But whatever you do it because you want it, not because it's what's expected of you. Lyra felt a strange warmth spread through her chest at her cousin's words. She had always known what her duties were, but no one had ever told her it was okay to question them.
I don't even know what I want,
Lyra admitted, her voice raw with emotion. Selene stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. That's okay. You don't have to know right now. But don't keep pretending. Don't keep living a life that isn't yours. Lyra nodded slowly, feeling a sense of calm she hadn't felt in days. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe. She didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't have to make a decision right away. But maybe it was time to start figuring it out for herself. The next few days passed in a blur of thought and reflection. Lyra still had her duties to attend to, but her heart was no longer fully in it. She found herself thinking about Adam more and more, wondering if he would understand what she was going through. He had seemed so certain of himself, so sure of his place in the universe. But what about her? Where did she fit into all of this? It wasn't long before Lyra made a decision. She would seek out Adam again, but this time, it wouldn't be for a fleeting conversation. She needed to know more. She needed to understand why his words had resonated with her so deeply. She needed to know if there was something more between them, something real. She had to know if he was the key to unlocking the life she had been too afraid to live. Lyra's mind was set. She had spent the last few days caught in her own thoughts, reflecting on everything that had happened since the banquet. The words Adam had spoken, the quiet moments between them. They all seemed to tug at her in a way she couldn't ignore. The confusion she had felt, the longing to be something more than a princess. It was all becoming clearer now. She didn't want to live a life that wasn't hers. She wanted to live for herself, make choices based on what felt right to her, not what was expected by those around her. There was only one person who seemed to understand that desire for something real: Adam. And so, without hesitation, Lyra decided that she would seek him out again. She had to know what it would be like to follow her heart, even if it meant stepping away from the crown and everything she had ever known. The palace was bustling as usual, but to Lyra, it all seemed distant. The meetings, the ceremonies, the endless parade of suitors. It all felt like a haze around her now. Her thoughts were only focused on one thing: finding Adam and figuring out what this strange connection between them meant. She made her way to the back garden, a place she often retreated to when she needed to be alone. The scent of flowers filled the air, but it wasn't enough to drown out the thumping of her heart. She had no idea where Adam was staying or how he would react when she found him. But she couldn't keep pretending that she didn't care. She couldn't keep living a life that wasn't hers. And maybe, just maybe, Adam would understand. The garden was quiet, save for the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustling of the trees in the breeze. As she walked through the winding paths, her thoughts began to race. What if he wasn't here? What if he didn't want to see her again? What if she was making a mistake? The fear crept in, but she pushed it away. She couldn't keep living in fear of making mistakes. It was time to take control of her life. Time to stop worrying about what others expected and start worrying about what she wanted. After what felt like an eternity, she spotted him. Adam was standing near the edge of the garden, his back to her, looking out at the horizon. His simple clothes and calm demeanor were a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind in the palace. He didn't belong here, yet at the same time he felt like the one person who truly did. Lyra took a deep breath and walked toward him, her footsteps soft on the grass. She wasn't sure what she was going to say, but she knew she couldn't leave without speaking her truth. When Adam turned around and saw her, his expression was one of surprise, but it quickly softened into something else. Curiosity, maybe even relief. "Princess," he said, his voice gentle. "I didn't expect to see you here." Lyra smiled, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "I didn't expect to be here either." She took a step closer, her eyes meeting his.
"I've been thinking about what you said. About living for myself."
Adam tilted his head slightly, his gaze never leaving hers.
"And what have you decided?" Lyra hesitated, the words forming in her mind but struggling to escape. She had spent so much time trying to figure out what she wanted, but now that she was standing in front of him, it felt like the decision was finally made. "I've decided that I can't keep living the way I have been," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't want to be the princess anymore."
Not in the way everyone expects me to be. I want to live for me.
Adam's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Lyra thought she saw something more in his eyes. A flicker of understanding. Of something deeper that was unspoken.
I understand, Adam said quietly.
It's hard, isn't it? Being caught between who you are and who everyone wants you to be.
Lyra nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She hadn't expected him to understand so easily, but somehow, his words made everything feel less complicated. She had been holding on to the idea of duty for so long, but now, standing here with Adam, it felt like she could finally let go. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to just walk away from all of it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've wondered," he said quietly, "but it's not always that simple. Walking away is one thing, but what happens after? What do you do when you finally have the freedom to choose?" Lyra's heart pounded in her chest.
I don't know, she admitted, but I think I'm ready to find out. They stood there for a long moment, neither of them speaking.
The silence between them was comfortable, a quiet understanding passing between them. Lyra had never felt more certain of anything in her life. She wasn't ready to give up everything, not yet at least, but she was ready to make a change. She was ready to live her life on her own terms. "I don't know what the future holds," Lyra said, breaking the silence. "But I do know that I don't want to make this decision alone." Adam looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Lyra thought he might turn away, that he might tell her it was all too much, that she was asking too much of him. But instead, he smiled, a small, quiet smile that sent a rush of warmth through her. "You won't be alone," he said softly. "I'll be here, whatever you decide." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra felt a sense of peace. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future would look like, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what was to come. As the sun began to set behind them, casting a soft glow over the garden, Lyra made a decision. She wouldn't go back to the palace. She wouldn't follow the path that had been set for her since the day she was born. Instead, she would follow her own path, even if it meant stepping away from everything she had ever known. With Adam by her side, she felt like she could do anything. "You don't have to choose a life you don't want," Adam said, as if reading her thoughts. "There's always another way, a way that's truly yours." Lyra nodded, her heart full of something new, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. And with that hope, she felt ready to face whatever lay ahead.